Part 3, Chapter 5. Reconstructed. Shouldn't you get moving? Alice nudged impatiently. I heard her voice, but gave no indication that I was listening. Dry, nostalgic judgment caressed the forgotten driveway attached to the crumbling outer image of my old home. Both hands stuffed in my pockets. I squinted as the sun rays shifted over the left side of my face, sneaking between the swaying leaves above. A swift breeze coated in a damp chill kissed my exposed skin and made me thankful for this leather jacket. I popped the collar and zipped it halfway up my torso, unable to break my gaze. The saturated memories frozen in place behind those decaying walls still spoke to me. I remember everything, always, but I also remember the house in a slightly different light, one where my dad drank coffee. Alice pushed again. Why would you even stop? You can barely keep your eyes off it on the bus or when she drives. I turned away, continuing down the long familiar strip toward town. I kicked a stray rock. I can hardly believe that was my life at one point, I said with a straight face. She perked up. You can burn it down if you want. I grinned. Maybe someday. Within the confines of my pocket, I rustled my hand around, caressing the ring with my thumb and reflecting on the days gone by. It was hard to distract myself from this view, however. The road before me was glistening with an explosion of greens and yellows. Every tree had an abundance of leaves that housed a playground for many chipmunks and birds. The docile banter of nature swelled from every direction and fixated me in the dead center of it all. I could hear everything. Every stream of water, snapping twigs, and rustling blades of grass. It all depended on which I chose to focus on. You know, I missed this. Walking to school, I mean. I observed the edge of the road, then up to the partially clouded sky. You have a lot of memories along this pavement, she responded in a flat tone. Most are repeats. Still, I never get tired of it. In my pocket, I felt a slight chill wrap around my finger. It twitched, and the pressure embedded by the ring almost loosened in a way. I closed my fist tight and pressed the tip of my thumb against it. Forcing a new bounce to my step, I picked up the pace slightly. My initial goal was to make it to class before the second bell. That way I can prove Tansu wrong. I've done it many times before. At this point, I had made it to the hayfield and intersection. I stopped by the road signs and waited for a car to pass, exiting my strip. After that, I crossed the pavement to the other side and started my shortcut down Bodge Road. On either side of me were houses now, with small front and side yards and expensive mailboxes lining the street. Almost no trees this close to the road, so I had no coverage. To my right, one driveway had a car jacked up and an air pressure tank kicking on every few minutes. I heard it miles away. I could smell firewood and spotted a light plume of smoke coming from a chimney stack. I slowed once I reached a house on my side with a tall chain-link fence surrounding the property. Almost immediately, a hefty thumping ran up on me from the other side of the fence, and I reacted with a slight jolt in my chest before the dog was halted by the hexagonal pattern. It barked loudly at my presence, and I stopped to observe its hostility. A black Rottweiler with tight-angled eyes and perky ears snapped at me. I observed it with wonder in my stare and curiosity in my posture. He had lifted himself upright with his front paws digging into the fence as he barked nonstop, but as my eyes intensified, the dog's barking became weaker. Finally, he let off the fence and paced back and forth, watching me closely. His tail abruptly lowered, and he let out a shrill whimper before turning back to the house. Alice sneered. Now he would make practice a bit more fun. I looked back at the sidewalk and continued on. I'm not fighting a dog, I said, annoyed, adjusting my back straps. You already fought Destro. What makes this fight any different? I ignored her comment and quickly forgot about the dog. Pushing on, I started a light jog, knowing I had wasted time and had to make up for it. I rounded the turn, and the sidewalk transitioned to dirt and more trees came into view. This road was a straightaway with more trees to my left and a few trees with the center of town poking through on my right. It continued for nearly a quarter mile before meeting at a four-way intersection. Hurriedly, I moved to the appropriate side, going with the traffic. This road I was on deliberately pasted with no smoking, no guns, and a big blue sign with a black bear silhouette, the school mascot. I was on the final stretch, so I picked up the pace one last time and ran alongside the road. Cars passed me by either way, and even though I didn't have a watch, I had a good feeling I was right on time. Arriving within 300 feet of the front doors, I heard a bell ring, and for a moment feared Tonsu would be proven right. However, to my liking, the horde of students began moving by the front doors and windows from the cafeteria. I smirked, brushing my slightly messy hair to the side, and moved to catch up with them. I joined the crowd, easily inserting myself into the flowing river of bodies. I started craning my neck in all directions, keeping pace. Alice spoke with a chuckle. I can sense her. Let's see if you can discern her aura in the crowd. Oh, I'll find her. No sweat. I answered out loud. A guy in front of me turned his head and gave me a funny look. What'd you say? I gawked at him. Huh? Oh, nothing. I avoided his direct stare. Idiot. I gave a sour expression and lowered my head. The crowd reached the main diverting corridors and started to split off in all directions. Classrooms, lockers, bathrooms, wherever they needed to go first. Then I felt a sort of ping in the back of my head. Alerted to a familiar sensation, I planted my feet on the floor and looked to my left. Tan, I called over. Perking up, she followed my voice and saw me moving toward her. You made it, she exclaimed. I rubbed the underside of my nose with a confident grin. Told ya. No problem. She noticed the jacket. Ah, I see you're finally wearing it. I bet he'll be happy about that. I shrugged. I just hope he doesn't want it back. Does it look weird? I asked. It's a little big on you. Otherwise, I think it reflects who you are. She smiled. I leaned in slightly, expecting more detail. In what way? Just a tad standoffish, from a distance, but soft to the touch. Alice butted in. Is she mocking you? I shook my head in response to Alice, but spoke directly to Tansu. I think that's pretty accurate. And hey, I like what you've got going on there. She blushed. Today, she wore her hair back in a low ponytail that left a lot of her bangs still drooping forward. Those bangs were held to one side with that same old lime green hairpin. Her shirt was a simple white tee, and on top of that was a dark blue button-down cardigan snapped all the way up. Light-toned khaki pants and a thick black belt completed her outfit and gave off strong Kari-inspired vibes. Thanks, she said shyly. We should probably get to class. Yeah, I'll catch you later, Tan. Also, in your face. Just had to rub it in. Bye, Kim. With a wave, we split off to our own destinations. The noisy clamor of people beginning their day surrounded me. I felt calm, more or less, though I faced grim reminders everywhere I looked. These walls no longer housed memories of lectures and soliciting. They were scarred over. I remembered the first day the school reopened after the accident with Stacy. Taking my first steps down these halls was overwhelming. At the same time, 2 weeks had passed and nothing was ever done. The guy who they pinned the blame on vanished without a trace, and I got away with it. Still, I remember what it was like to be here after those 2 weeks, how sick I got. All of the raw, potent energy just wriggling through every ounce of air. All the angst, fear, loathing, and scathing distrust. I absorbed it all, vulnerable in my new spiritual state. But now, I've grown accustomed to it. I enjoy the sensation it gives me. There is a clarity with the people who walk among me. With that thought in my head, I made it to my first class before the second bell, and the lessons began. Like every day before, time dragged the second the classroom door closed. I took my seat and let my bag hit the floor. The hard plastic chair welcomed me with immediate discomfort, and I adjusted myself to a half-lying, half-upright position, crossing my arms and yawning. My eyes eased themselves shut, and I listened to the other students as they arrived, talking and laughing along. Art was either the most interesting thing that I will hear all day, or equally the most boring, mind-numbing tasks. Today was a little different. We were given the task of sketching two things, something you love and something you fear. A speech outlining duality followed, and we were left with 10 minutes to consider. I wasted 3 pages with quick doodles, just brainstorming. The jacket I wore was hung up on the back of the chair and gave me excellent cushion when I leaned back, stressed. I decided to start with my fear, thinking it would be easy, but it wasn't. There were many things I fear, but none I should express as part of a stupid drawing assignment. I don't know what I feared most, anyway. So I drew a door, a single steel door with a small barred window at the top half and bold metal rivets punched throughout. I could have spent all day drawing things I'm afraid of, and yet I struggled to find many things I loved. Things, not people. As far as memorable or special possessions go, I don't have many. No trinkets, photos, or hand-me-downs to treasure. Nothing that lasted and truly stood out. Next to the door, I drew the first object that really stuck with me as special, even though I have had almost no real interaction with it. A wind chime, just like the one we have in the yard. I felt close to satisfied with what I presented, but guilty that they were only acceptable quality. I'm overthinking it. This assignment probably wouldn't even count for a major grade considering how close we are to the end of the year, but I handed it in nonetheless and waited. Once the bell came, every nearby door burst open and the same cluster formed. I exited into the hall, throwing on my jacket followed by my backpack, and started like every other day before. But not even 10 feet down the hall, I was immediately stricken by a muscle spasm in my chest. This swayed my balance slightly, and I braced myself on the lockers to my side. Wincing, I glared down the hallway with half-open eyes, and my vision started to pulse with the beating of my heart. The lights above me dimmed, and one by one, the students phased out of reality. My eyes slammed shut, and when they reopened, there was darkness. Broken light fixtures swinging above, bloody, shredded corpses on the floor, and deafening silence. From the nothing sprouted a whisper that grew into a commanding yell. "Hey!" Alice shouted. All at once, I was back in my eyes and lifted myself off the lockers. A cold sweat formed my upper lip, and I went into a tight panic. Immediately, I sprinted forward and located the nearest door that wasn't a classroom. I burst in and slammed it behind me. Pressing my back against the cold metal, I caught my breath and stared at the hanging string in the center of the room. More flashes of the stone room bombarded me as I reached for the string. I pulled it and the light flicked on. Whipping my head around, I realized I had run into a janitor's closet. A small, dank room with plastic bucket sink and a mirror to my left. Many brooms, mops, and wet floor signs filled the tight space, and a musky bleach smell burned my nostrils. "Another one?" Alice warbled. I spoke softly. "Yeah, not so bad this time." "A lot of knots in the air today. You shouldn't be so empathetic." I pushed off the door and approached the sink, placing my hands on the edge and staring at myself in the mirror. "I can't control it," I responded hoarsely, my breath tightening. Behind my head, through the reflection, I saw Alice sort of fade into the light. She looked cynical as always, but a little less upfront about it. On the edge of the sink was a roll of brown paper towels. I peeled and ripped a couple of sheets and wiped my face. "You know, I always thought anxiety attacks were over-dramatized in movies and TV." I swallowed hard. Alice gave me a look that could almost be considered worried. "I think you're closer to the PTSD side of things, though there's more influence than just your mind." I nodded. "This is the 3rd time this month, and each time has taken you longer to break free." I raised an eyebrow. "Longer? How long was I stuck?" She shrugged. 40 or so seconds, I think. Some kid with glasses ran to get a teacher. Crap. Guess I'll wait here till after the bell rings. "You'll be late," she said plainly. "Just like old times," I joked. Trying to settle back to normalcy, I exhaled until my lungs were drained completely of air. Then I took in a big breath through my nose, tried to ignore the bleach scent, and let it out. I got my breathing under control, so now I watched my reflection. Alice remained. No emotion. The light flickered above me, adding to the overall feeling of claustrophobia and misplacement. Getting up close to my own reflection, I slid my pointer finger across my chin and examined the tiny horizontal scar. It was barely noticeable and had almost no bump to the touch. I nearly forgot it was there. I ruffled through my hair and felt the lack of density. Ever since I cut it short when I was a child, my hair has always been the same length and texture, just above my shoulders, fluffy with dense waves at the ends. I haven't cut it in these 6 months. 3 inches doesn't seem like much, but it wasn't just about the length. Overall, it's become less dense, and the waves on the ends were less dramatic. On top of that, the weight was noticeable to me, though, strangely enough, I liked it like this. Now with Alice being a part of me, I have taken a liking to the added length and feeling of hair in front of my eyes. Outside of the door, I heard the bell ring. Now late, I lifted myself off the sink and opened the door a crack. I peered out into the hall, ensuring caution in every motion. On the other side of the hall, 10 lockers down, I saw 3 boys by a water fountain, conversing with no regard for their own volume. I marched by them with a nonchalant stride and expression, ghosting, though catching a peripheral glance. Not a word, and no invasive thoughts. Alice's hunger did bubble briefly, reactionary and swiftly subdued. I swallowed and blinked heavily, a minor headache introducing itself. Arriving at the gymnasium, I gave the teacher a quick apology for being 4 minutes late and entered the bathroom to change as most others left. Today, we had a list of exercises to complete before moving on to whatever activity was planned. 10 laps around the court, stretches, 20 sit-ups, 10 push-ups, and more stretches. After that, we split into 4 teams and set up the badminton nets long ways across the gym. Personally, I wasn't all that interested in badminton today. I sat on the sidelines and spun my racket in my palm, pondering some faraway thoughts. When I did get tagged in, I couldn't motivate myself to get invested and mainly played defensively. Luckily, the opposing team wasn't playing competitively, and we were all just killing time. Although, I think Alice enjoyed the game on a fundamental level. By the end of class, a sleepy numbness entered my blood. A large yawn erupted and left my eyes watering. Like all the other students, I headed to the bathroom to change. In standard fashion, maneuvered myself away from the locker area and carried my clean clothes to a private toilet stall. The echo of the other girls' voices kept me entertained. Gossip and immature comedy were prevalent in here. I held the bundle of worn clothes against my hip and strolled out of the bathroom in a black t-shirt with a white star on the chest and the pants I wore on my way in. One by one, everyone filtered back out and returned to their bags. I hoisted mine over my shoulder and waited for the bell. After it rang, the day was feeling repetitive and my focus waned. I had to shut off my ears to get around the constant chatter in every direction. A headache grew while I weaved between faceless students. I kept my head raised. The next class came and went without burning any new information in my brain. All the teachers knew focus would be hard to gather at this point, so they were doing their best to keep lessons simple and easily absorbed. I tapped my pencil along, chin resting in my palm with a glazed-over look. Alice had stepped away from my vision much later than usual. I no longer felt her buzz, which made me feel even more empty, thus enhancing the zombie state. Just when I thought I was over the day, the last bell before lunch rang, and a new spark ignited in me. Food. That would inspire anyone. With haste and keen awareness, I jogged down the halls and got to the cafeteria as quickly as I could. A bustling hunger presented itself, whining like a dog with a treat dangling overhead. Stepping into the new bubble of noise, I slowed and observed the droves of students either sitting at the circular tables or waiting in line. I joined the impatient line and let my eyes wander around, taking each crawling inch as it came. I didn't see anyone I was interested in at the various tables, but when I looked ahead through the line, I saw Tansu alone. She was about 10 people ahead of me and clearly rigid like always. Seeing her gave me a jolt of happiness in my chest, and I debated on calling out to her, but decided to just wait until we both got our food. But then, a guy and girl approached from her left and nonchalantly cut directly in front of her. She didn't react in any way, besides lowering her head a little. My gleeful face quickly switched to pensive annoyance while the guy wrapped his arm around the girl's shoulders and held her close. The line advanced another step, and I watched Tansu drag her feet forward. Not fully attentive, the pair ahead only took a half step, and Tansu ended up bumping her forehead right into the guy's back. She bumped off of him and retreated herself, which only made her bump into the girl behind her. "Watch it," the girl scoffed. Tansu then balled up between them, her shoulders tight to her neck and her hands under her armpits. The pair ahead turned their heads and chuckled before taking a step back and pushing Tansu again, which in turn bumped her back into the other girl. The girl, who I now saw to be the bratty rich girl Brianna, snapped at the guy. "Really, Brent? Push her the other way, not at me." Her voice was like biting a metal fork. He looked at her with a dirty grin. "What?" He mockingly stretched his word. "She bumped me first." By this point, I gave up my spot in line and started moving up the side with a huff in my breath. He removed his arm from his girlfriend's shoulder and started to jab a finger in Tansu's direction. I saw this action and sucked in a short breath, then reached out and wrapped my finger around his meaty digit. He paused, mouth ajar with confusion. His head rotated to me, and Tansu also looked up, both of her fists now wrapped tightly in their little odd ball. "Let go of my finger," he said, still caught off guard. I didn't say anything, just kept my fiery glare on him. The cockeyed stupor on his face shifted to an entertained smirk, and then he tried pulling his finger out of my grip. It wouldn't budge. I had my hand so tightly bound around his finger that the air bubbles in his joints cracked with the third pull. Now, the rest of the line was privy to our little encounter, and were all looking in his direction. His bemused gawk evolved to anger quickly. "Let my finger go." My voice was stiff, deeper. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough already, Brent?" His girlfriend inserted herself. "Get lost, bitch." I didn't even give her the courtesy of a look. Instead, I tightened my grip, causing his knuckle to turn purple and his face tensed. I scrutinized every muscle in his face as he held back the pain. His other hand shot out and gripped the front of my face and attempted to push me back. My neck went rigid, and I launched my fist forward, hitting him in the center of the chest and knocking him free from my grip. He gave a big "oof" noise and clutched his torso, glaring back at me and wincing. Then I felt a soft touch on my arm. My eyes shot to the sensation. It was Tansu's hand resting gently on my sleeve. "Kimmy, stop," she requested quietly. My irises trembled and my vision narrowed. Brent rolled both shoulders and stepped to me, half reaching for my neck but stopping short and balling a fist. The girl wrapped around his arm and hung off of him, staring with a bewildered ire. "Psycho freak," he griped. They both faced forward and pushed their way ahead, snarling at other students and cutting straight ahead for the door. Alice spoke. 2 days in a row playing the hero? Risky, you know." I ignored her and closed my eyes, trying to reset myself. The curdling bubble in my skull faded, and the tightness under my skin disappeared completely. I then looked at Tansu with a softened expression. "Tan, you can't let people like him push you around." She chuckled, her nervous fists unclasped. "Oh yeah? And what would you have had me do? Push him back?" she said sarcastically. Amused, I threw my head back with a sigh. "I'm just saying, stand up to them, or get a teacher at least. Let them know you aren't just a mound of dirt to be kicked or stomped on." She cocked her head a little, and her hair fell to the side. "Okay, I'll be sure to do that." More sarcasm. The line returned to its normal pace, and we were almost inside the buffet. More people had arrived in the cafeteria, and so the noise level rose accordingly, making it slightly more difficult for me to focus on one conversation. "Eventful day?" she asked. 3 other lines of dialogue skipped around in my head. Somewhat. I was getting really tired, but I think I'm awake now," I gloated. Brent and his girlfriend exited on the other side of the room with their food. They moved together with a superior strut until they reached a table with a couple of other people and took their seats. I watched him, but spoke to Tansu. "How about you? Anything happened since this morning?"
"Nothing as exciting as that."
I flicked my tongue in disgust. Brent's a dick.
"It's sort of my fault. I wasn't paying attention."
"Oh, I saw. It doesn't matter. He had no right to treat you that way." She went quiet for a second, and I continued to watch him. Only now did I see that at the very same table was a familiar face. Obscured by twice the makeup and longer bangs was Stacey herself. Brent sat beside her and leaned in close, whispering something to make her smile the slightest amount. He rubbed her back and pushed the tray of food he brought over in front of her with a kind smile. She stared at it without any change in her expression, hands held tight between her legs. Remorseful neutrality washed over me when I saw her, the way she kept her head low and face hidden. She hasn't been the same since that day. The arrogant, self-assured, beautiful Miss Everything was now too afraid to go anywhere without her big brother. The visceral scars she hid behind all the pasty muck were the product of a truth she never came forward with, something I almost wanted to thank her for. Tonto and I both got our lunch and moved toward our usual seats with minimal haste. The two of us found and sat at an empty table and unraveled the plastic spoon and fork from the rolled napkin. The collection of miscellaneous junk that passed as a wholesome meal around here was no less of a letdown than every other day.
"Awesome, sweet potatoes,"
Tonto expressed contained excitement.
"Come on, really? How can you enjoy this crap so much?" "Some of us aren't picky eaters."
She gave a sarcastic sneer.
"I'm not that picky. I just have standards. This stuff is so bland."
I lifted a spoonful of applesauce and ate it quickly.
"You're overreacting. We've all had worse."
She defended it playfully.
"Pardon me for expecting a little bit of salt or seasoning on my food."
I smiled. Her jaw shifted to the side. Admission.
"Yeah, I can't argue with that."
We both shoveled a few bites and set aside the conversation for the time being. The clamor of other kids was less intense, and I was able to relax my neck muscles and just space out for a moment. Then a new voice approached. "Heyo, what's going on?" Joey came forward with a tray of his own.
"Hey, Joey, take a seat."
I greeted kindly. Sure, he beamed, setting his tray on the table across from us and sitting down. Immediately, I noticed a big difference in his appearance.
"No hat today? That's a bit odd for you."
I started. His hand shot up to his hair and covered it partially. "Shut up, Kim. I had to wash it sometime." He grinned.
"When was the last time?"
I leaned in with a sly look. "I don't know, honestly." He snickered.
"Gross. How much mold was inside?"
I ate another spoonful of applesauce. "Who knows? I spent maybe an hour chipping away at it." We both snickered at the dumb joke. Then he blushed a little. "Looks like you're finally wearing it." I glanced down at the jacket and blushed too, licking the front of my teeth.
"Had to sometime. Otherwise you might take it back."
I tried to maintain a level of playful humor.
"It looks good."
He smiled.
"Thanks."
I smiled back. Eyes shifting, I looked at Tansu and saw how quiet she had gotten.
"You alright?"
I asked.
Mm-hmm.
She hummed with a little shy nod, chewing. Squinting with concern, I jabbed my food a few times and collected a bite in my fork. Joey kept the conversation alive. "Hey, I saw you and Brent going at it. What was up with that?"
"First off, chew your food, dude."
He cleared his throat, smiled and pinched his lips, then swallowed.
"Second, he was being himself. Need I say more?"
He got a little serious. "You stood up to him?" I set my fork down.
"Yes."
"That's just... wow. I was gonna bring up what happened with Needy yesterday, but you went and did it again. What's gotten into you?" He laughed.
"Something in the air, I guess. I don't know."
His lower lip raised. "All right." Impressed, he leaned back a little and continued eating. "I mean..." He chewed, stopped, and swallowed before continuing.
I was gonna go over there when he started shouting, but then he stormed off, so I had your back. Out of nowhere came a loud sneeze. The two of us both reacted sharply and saw Tansu with her spoon hovering in front of her mouth and her face covered in squash. Bright orange, wet, mushy food spattered all over her face and left her red with embarrassment. My mouth halted wide open just as I was going to take another bite, the three of us frozen. Then he and I exploded into laughter. I dropped my spoon and buried my face in my hands, laughing so hard my chest tightened. Tansu just sat there, dumbfounded and motionless, food sliding down her cheeks. A crude expression started to form, and the redness only grew. "It's not funny, you guys." She trembled, ashamed. Hastily, she looked around for a napkin. Joey had taken a large breath to calm himself while I wiped the tears from my eyes. He snatched up his napkin and handed it over to her with a few giggles still seeping out. "Sorry, Ton, but that was absolutely hilarious." She pouted and wiped the remaining food from her face, then pushed her tray away. "I'm glad you're enjoying yourself," she responded stiffly. I nudged her gently with my elbow. She looked back and gave me an assuring smile. Now I knew she was okay. So we continued on as though nothing happened. I finished up my food, and Tansu was drinking her strawberry milk, and Joey stuffed the last bite into his mouth. "So," he started, "when can I cash in that rain check?" I set my tray aside and leaned forward, locking eyes. "Maybe you can pay for the food when we go bowling next Sunday." "Hey, whoa, I don't think that's fair. I was thinking us three could just get smoothies or something." Tansu and I exchanged a look, smirking. "Smoothies? That could work." She nodded, and he drummed the table. "Let's not get crazy, though. I don't get paid for another 10 days. Bi-weekly paychecks suck." "Work sucks. How is the dump anyway?" "Transfer station," he corrected. "Dump," I said with a pop. He dismissed me with a wave. "Whatever. It's a job at the end of the day. Just trying to save money and help with the bills. It's not as bad as everyone thinks. It's not like I'm swan diving into people's garbage." I retracted my demeanor for a moment and let the reality of his motives soften my sarcastic bristle. Thoughtful, I spoke with a warm voice. "Is it making much difference?" "Not with the medical bills, but I pay for groceries when I can, so it's something." Tansu's lips pursed, and she sank into her seat a little. I sniffled and tapped a finger on the table. "I'm sure your family appreciates it." He cleared his throat, obviously wanting to move on. Anyway, I'm free this Tuesday, I think. We can do smoothies after school." Tansu spoke up. "That should be fine. My mom tutors on Tuesdays. She always makes a pun out of it." I muttered in a silly deep voice. "Tutoring Tuesdays?" She chortled, and I licked my lips, holding back a grin. Joey chuckled and leaned back for a stretch. Then he stood up and threw his bag over his shoulder. I tracked him with a raised brow. "Where are you going?" He fiddled with the shoulder straps. "I got study hall next period, so I think I'm going to check out and swing to the hub for a cream soda and jerky. Won't have time to stop before work." "Ah, all right. Drive safe, will ya?" I put 2 fingers to my forehead and gave him a little salute. He waved. "Of course. See ya." Tansu raised a hand and curled her 4 fingers as a little wave goodbye, and he stepped away. Within a minute of his departure, I collected all of our trays and walked them over to the drop-off counter to be washed, leaving Tansu alone for a moment. I passed by many tables, including the one where Stacy and Brent sat. Neither of them looked at me, but I side-eyed them the whole way. It's funny how back in the day I did everything I could to avoid her spotlight gaze and escape any unfortunate encounter. Now, I wish I could just talk to her. She can't even look at me. I dropped off the trays and, on my way back, caught Brent's stare. We locked on for a quick second before I smirked and faced ahead. I returned to the table and took my seat at Tansu's side. She was fidgeting with a broken zipper tab. She struggled to pull it down and had to give it a big rip before it was freed from the lock-up state. Then she zipped it all the way around and left the bag on her lap. I was about to speak when the bell blared and signaled the end of lunch. We each stood up and hoisted our bags, preparing to join the crowd. My mind swelled with thoughts of the weekend just around the corner. Sleeping in, big breakfast on Sunday, and a cheerful forecast. Butterflies ran freely in my chest. We walked together, side by side, a small space between us where our hands shifted with every step. A misstep on my part bumped our hands together, and in that moment, I experienced a slight sting in my finger. "Oops," Tanzu exclaimed, her eyes tracking to our hands. I noticed she had stopped walking, so I planted my feet and turned my head to see her retracting back and bending down to the floor. "Oh no," she cried sadly. She turned to me with her upturned palm outstretched. Time seemed to move in slow motion when my eyes fell on the object in her hand. A slithering pit of burning oil formed in my gut as I reached out and took the pieces in my hand. "Kimmy, your ring broke,"